economic freedom in our lifetime. You hear that phrase, and, well, it's the unfiltered, unapologetic voice of Julius Malema, right? You just can't ignore it.
Absolutely. And it's such a stark contrast to what came immediately after apartheid fell.
Exactly. For a moment there, you had this immense hope really embodied by Nelson Mandela, unity, healing, a brighter future.
That Rainbow Nation idea.
Right. But now, 3 decades on, we hear this very different voice, not echoing Mandela's, let's say, gentle diplomacy.
No, much more urgent, defiant even. A promise the establishment maybe underestimated at first.
And then truly began to fear. So today we're diving deep into Julius Malema. We're using a really interesting YouTube source. It's called Why Julius Malema is a Threat, from the channel Risen Africa.
And our mission really is to unpack that. Why is he seen as a threat? A threat to whom? And what? What are the big, maybe uncomfortable questions his rise forces South Africa and maybe the world to look at?
Okay, to get a feel for that defiance, let's jump straight into maybe one of the most controversial bits. The song, Shoot to Kill. Kill the Boer, the farmer.
And just for clarity, Boer, it's an Afrikaans term, often used for white Afrikaans-speaking farmers.
Yeah.
A loaded term, historically.
Definitely. And this chant, it was heard at rallies in South Africa for years. But then, and this is pretty astonishing, it gets played in the White House.
Yeah, I remember this. President Trump playing it for President Ramaphosa.
Exactly. Trump plays this clip for Cyril Ramaphosa himself, a former anti-apartheid activist, and frames it as, quote, evidence of white genocide. Just surreal.
It really was. And Malema's reaction to that?
Classic Malema, in a way. He basically quipped he was the first black man to turn Oval Office into a cinema.
Wow. But in that almost dismissive comment, he did something strategic, didn't he? He wasn't just provoking.
How so?
Well, he forced a global superpower to actually acknowledge South Africa's land question. Something very domestic suddenly became global.
Right. He put it on the world stage.
Exactly. Showing how these post-colonial issues, they don't just stay within borders anymore. He kind of inserted himself right into global history at that moment.
So this immediate, very global clash, what does it tell us right off the bat about Malema and maybe about where South Africa is right now?
Well, it shows his deliberate defiance, for one, and how, as the source points out, he's directly challenging what it calls the post-apartheid compromise.
The compromise being?
This sort of delicate balance where, okay, the flag changed, political freedom arrived, but the real economic power, the wealth, the land, the opportunities, they largely stayed where they were, mostly with the white minority.
And Malema comes along and says?
He says very clearly, we are not Mandela, and we're not going to do Mandela things here. He's drawing a line. He's saying, I'm not bound by those negotiations, those deals Mandela made.
Yeah, he says it explicitly. We are not bound by Mandela's resolutions at all. And he adds, if there is any commitment Mandela made with them and then we are going against it, they must go to Mandela. We don't owe them anything. We have no agreement with them.
It's quite a statement, essentially. Mandela did what he needed to then, but the conditions are different now. Malema sees a different path.
And that feeds into this perception, or maybe reality, that Mandela's diplomacy prioritized peace, perhaps, over economic justice, the very thing Malema seems to despise.
Right. But is it just perception? Or did those necessary compromises back then, looking back, genuinely fall short on the economic front?
Yeah.
And how does that history fuel Malema's, well, his unwavering stance today? What about his own life?
Well, yeah, to get that fury, you really have to look at his roots. He was born in 1981. He grew up under apartheid.
So his formative years were defined by it.
Absolutely. Not Mandela's Rainbow Nation optimism, what the source calls the iron-fisted brutality of the apartheid regime. He was raised by his mother and grandmother in Seshego, Limpopo, a poverty-stricken township. Daily life was, systemic racism, inequality, poverty.
So when freedom came in 94.
He was 13. Old enough to understand the weight of Mandela taking that oath, the promises of freedom, unity, prosperity.
A huge moment.
Huge. But then as years passed, the political change didn't translate into economic change for him or for millions of black South Africans. The poverty remained. The ANC's promises started feeling, well, hollow.
And that disillusionment turned into
fury. Not just disappointment, but real anger.
And that anger, that palpable anger you're describing, that became the fuel for his rise, didn't it? How did he actually channel that into politics, especially being so young?
He was political early on. Joined the ANC Youth League at just 14. By 27, he's leading it, already known across the country for these fiery speeches.
Always outspoken.
Always. Hammering away at unfulfilled promises, corruption, and crucially, the land issue. He wasn't afraid to criticize the ANC establishment from within.
Which ultimately led to his expulsion, right? In 2013 for sowing division.
Yep. But like you said earlier, that wasn't the end. It was actually a beginning.
He starts his own party.
Immediately. The Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF.
Yeah.
And that message, it just hit a nerve, especially with younger South Africans.
And the growth was rapid.
Phenomenal. Less than 5 years, and the EFF is the third biggest party in the country. That tells you a lot about the level of disillusionment, particularly among the youth who felt completely left behind by the post-apartheid economy.
Okay, so let's dig into that core issue then. Land.
Yeah. In South Africa, land is. It's never just soil, is it? It's tied up with power, identity, wealth, history, everything.
And the legacy of dispossession under colonialism and apartheid is profound.
Profound. The stats our source gives are just stark. Okay, end of apartheid. White South Africans, less than 10% of the population, controlled nearly 90% of productive farmland.
90%. And black South Africans.
Over 80% of the population owned just 4%. 4%.
And you said earlier that imbalance hasn't really shifted much, even after 3 decades of ANC rule.
Not significantly, no, which really underlines the economic continuity despite political change.
So, facing that deeply entrenched reality,
Right.
What's Malema's specific proposal? What's the demand?
It's direct. Land expropriation without compensation. That's the cornerstone.
No ambiguity there.
None. He basically says, if you vote EFS, this is what we'll do. And he's very clear it doesn't matter what Donald Trump or Britain or the EU thinks. He even said, we remain unshaken. Actually, we are more determined after the Donald Trump tweet to expropriate our land without compensation.
That's doubling down.
Completely. And that call, predictably, set off alarms internationally.
Yeah, the backlash was pretty swift and fierce, as the source puts it. Lots of commentary about South Africa heading towards, Zimbabwe-style chaos.
Right. And Trump's tweet, even though it was later debunked, it did exactly what Malema probably wanted. It put South African land reform right on the global agenda.
Forced the conversation.
Yep. And then you had others wading in, like Elon Musk, who, let's not forget, grew up in apartheid South Africa, calling Malema's vision madness.
But interestingly, didn't all that international pressure kind of backfire in a way, domestically at least?
It seems so. Paradoxically, it appeared to strengthen his support at home, particularly among those disillusioned young people who felt the ANC hadn't delivered for them.
And there were those leaked diplomatic cables, too, weren't there? From Washington, Amsterdam, London.
Yeah, expressing real fear that Malema's stance could cause instability. But again, that external worry just seemed to boost his image internally as the guy standing up to foreign interference.
He played it well. And his responses to critics.
Oh, characteristically ruthless. Someone challenges him on old tax return stuff, and he just dismisses it, tells the interviewer they sound like a scratched CD, asks them to get something new, show some skill.
Ouch. And the comparisons to Mugabe.
He draws a careful line there. He insists, we are not grabbing farms, we are reclaiming dignity.
That phrase, reclaiming dignity, is so important, isn't it? It shifts the narrative. It's not about chaotic land grabs like in Zimbabwe, he argues, but about historical justice, systematic reform, albeit radical.
Exactly. It connects the land issue directly to the feeling of stolen dignity, which resonates deeply with people who feel the promises of 1994 weren't fully kept. It's framed as rebalancing, not just chaos.
Right. Okay, so let's loop back to that song, the Kill the Boer chant.
Yeah. When Malema shouted it on stage, it caused tremors within South Africa for sure. But then, when it gets played inside the White House,
it transforms. It becomes a global incident.
Totally. It ricochets everywhere.
And as the source suggests, this wasn't really just about Trump making a controversial move. It tapped into something deeper about South Africa itself.
What's hot?
The Fortitude. Maybe the lie South Africa told itself after apartheid. That democracy alone was enough, that reconciliation could happen without restitution, that you could have dignity without addressing the land issue.
This idea of an illusion.
Yeah, this delicate illusion, politically free, but economically still chained in many ways. For 3 decades, that silence held. And then Malema just shattered it.
And his defense of using the song.
He argues it's not his song. He says, I did not compose this song. I found this song. The struggle heroes composed this song. All I'm doing is to defend the legacy of our struggle.
So positioning it as part of historical struggle, not a current incitement.
Exactly. And he also points out that South African courts have ruled there's nothing wrong with this song. in terms of incitement. For him, it symbolizes those unresolved grievances.
Okay, now here's where it gets maybe even broader. The source connects Malema's rhetoric to something bigger happening across Africa.
Yeah, this resurgence of post-colonial thinking, particularly around economic sovereignty.
Right, we're seeing examples like Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré nationalizing gold mines recently in 2024.
Or Mali reclaiming its Tell-Me mine in 2023. Niger, too, taking control of a uranium mine from a French company just last December.
So Malema's language, his demands, they're not happening in isolation. It feels like part of a regional awakening.
A pushback against neo-colonial economic structures, perhaps.
Which brings us back to that core question. Why is Julius Malema considered a threat?
And the source offers a pretty direct answer. He's not necessarily seen as a threat to South Africans.
But
He's seen as a threat to power.
explain that.
Well, think about it. Power, established power, economic power. It's rarely truly afraid of just violence. What it often fears more is the truth, especially a truth that might force a redistribution of wealth and influence.
And Malema speaks to.
The poor, the young, the forgotten, those who feel the system hasn't worked for them, so who finds him dangerous. The source suggests corrupt politicians, maybe? Foreign investors whose profits might rely on land with questionable historical ownership. A global system that prefers to, sweep historical injustices under the rug.
He threatens the status quo by demanding we actually confront that history.
Precisely. The establishment paints him as dangerous.
And maybe he is, in some ways, but the source implies the real threat they perceive.
Is that Malema might actually be right about the fundamental injustices.
But we should probably also acknowledge the counter-arguments, right? What are the criticisms of his approach, even if the diagnosis of the problem is correct?
Absolutely. Critics would argue that the method's expropriation without compensation could genuinely destabilize the economy, scare off crucial investment, maybe even harm food security.
The Zimbabwe comparison comes up again there.
It does. And there's the argument about whether trying to fix historical injustices this way might inevitably create new injustices in the process. It's an incredibly complex path he's advocating, a real tightrope.
It certainly is, which leaves us with this massive question, really. The one Malema forces onto the table: can a country ever truly heal if it refuses restitution for what was stolen?
That's the core of it.
So we leave you with that to think about. Is Julius Malema a visionary leader fighting for justice that's long overdue, or is he a reckless radical playing with fire?
There are strong arguments both ways.
Keep exploring these complex global issues with us. It's vital we keep asking these tough questions.